There is a problem in the wine world so crippling, it was named the Devastator. To this day, no real cure has been discovered. We've only learned how to live with it and mitigate its damage. Hello, enophiles. Today I'm discussing Phylloxera vastatrix, the Devastator, including the incredible history of how it brought the wine world to its knees, the remarkable and complex biology of this tiny vine assassin, and the surprising solution to this vexing crisis. So grab your favorite beverage and cheers the like button. At least in direct relation to wine, this story begins in the early colonies of America. Wild grapevines were abundant, and some colonies were established to domesticate these and transform their fruits into fine wines, suitable for European palates. After many fruitless attempts that resulted in undesirable wine, the decision was made to remedy the matter by simply importing the noble European variety Vitis vinifera to show these uncultured and uncouth American vines how real wine was grown. The result was not as expected, and the planted vines began to deteriorate, slowly producing less fruit, before finally dying altogether. This was tried repeatedly with the same results. Experts were brought in from overseas, such as a well-known Italian grower brought in by Thomas Jefferson to plant vinifera vines near Jefferson's Monticello estate several times, but still, death proved inevitable. Without much choice, local varieties were finally embraced for the mass production of wine in the country. Some growers even cultivated hybrids between the local varieties and Vitis vinifera, many of which thrived and could produce wines. This may not have been the desired quality of wine, but when faced with a choice of no wine or lesser wine, the latter won out. We aren't done with America yet, but there isn't much else interesting for a while here, so we'll skip a little forward in time and we'll hop across the ocean to Europe in the 1860s, where something devastating is growing. After the first sighting in 1863, it took only 5 years for many of the vineyards in southern France to show signs of attack. The affected vineyards stood no chance as vignerons watched their crop helplessly as it wilted and died. If they did produce a crop, the resulting wine was a sad, diluted shadow of its former self. This didn't satiate its appetite, and it continued to spread mercilessly. Once a strong foothold was established in France, this seeming plague began spreading throughout much of Europe. It entered Portugal in 1872, then parts of Spain just 2 years later. The next year, it was discovered in southern Germany. The Germans, having already witnessed the incalculable damage wrought elsewhere, took drastic measures and were able to prevent it from truly making the country one of its new homes. They instituted an immediate grubbing policy and without financial compensation. Italy was affected by 1879. As this unexplainable blight spread outward to other countries, it continued filling the remaining unaffected regions in France, finally reaching Champagne, the last affected area of France, in 1890. In the span of 2 decades, it had destroyed 70% of the vineyards in Europe. It was believed by many in the industry that this was the end of fine wine in the world. During this time, much was done to discover the problem and to remedy the effects. Digging up dead vines revealed blackened, rotting roots that resembled diseased vines, but did not match any known diseases. A commission was formed to investigate the issue and was similarly unable to determine a cause when digging up dead vines. They then began digging up live vines and found an alarming amount of almost microscopic aphids infesting the roots. After studying these aphids, they released their results, naming the creature Phylloxera vastatrix, or the Devastator, and labeling it the root of the problem. The scientific community did not immediately agree with these findings, still believing disease to be the culprit, so no progress was made towards discovering a solution since it was not agreed upon that the problem had been uncovered. Given more time and more evidence, it was finally accepted that Phylloxera, brought over by accident on American vines, was the cause. But that did not bring the industry any closer to a solution, as desperate measures were taken to eradicate this malady to no avail. Countless remedies were attempted with varying creativity, but all were met with the same disappointing results. Noxious treatments such as hydrogen sulfide and carbon bisulfide were more likely to harm farm workers than these resilient critters. Unsurprisingly, the real attempts at using urine, irrigating with white wine, and burying live frogs were unsuccessful. And while these last ideas may seem laughable, it is important to note that people's livelihoods were crumbling around them, and there was nothing that anybody could do about it. The French government even offered a handsome cash award for finding the cure to the problem. Eventually, it was suggested to graft European vines onto the American vines that seemed to coexist with Phylloxera. Grafting itself was not a novel concept and had even been practiced in Roman times. This idea was resisted at first for several reasons, including resentment against using the very thing that caused the problem, as well as an unfounded belief that this vine that could not produce wine to their standards would somehow taint the European vines when used as a rootstock. Ultimately, this method was implemented, but was not awarded the prize money, as it was determined that it did not actually rid the vines of the pests. Also, it did not immediately solve the suffering growers' problems. The vigor of the new rootstock caused wine production to skyrocket and therefore prices to plummet. After 2 generations of punishing hardship, many found themselves unable to cover the costs of production through wine sales. This led to riots in 1907 and 1911, with some pouring wine into the streets rather than selling it below cost. So what exactly is Phylloxera, and how did it cause so much damage? Grape Phylloxera has a complex life cycle that changes based off of the environment and host vine. They are near microscopic and on certain hosts can spend most of their time underground, making them hard to detect until they have done extensive damage. They can reproduce sexually, but females are parthenogenetic and therefore do not require a male to produce fertile eggs. A single female can produce hundreds of eggs, most of which will be female. This is why it only takes one female to start an infestation. Combine this with their tiny size, allowing them to hitch a ride on farmers' footwear, equipment, and vehicles without being noticed, and it is clear how quickly they can spread. During summer, and on resistant American vine species, most Phylloxera will live and breed on the leaves. A female can lay up to 7 generations of eggs. First, they will form a gall on the leaf, a red-brown swollen lump where they can place their eggs. That generation will eventually hatch, move on to new leaves, and repeat the cycle. Entire generations will live and die, knowing only this leaf cycle. But when the leaves begin to wilt seasonally, and with them the housing and food source, some of the current Phylloxera will simply burrow underground and begin a new cycle on the roots. In the case of the resistant vine species, the Phylloxera feeds and breeds on the hair-like feeder roots. The resistant American vines and Phylloxera have been together for some time, resulting in coevolution that allows the Phylloxera to feed and breed on the vines without killing their homes and meal tickets. From the Phylloxera's perspective, the vine provides just about everything it needs, but never quite makes it feel comfortable. Resistant vines produce sap that makes feeding difficult for the aphids. This discourages them from spending too long in one place and rather look for a better food source. As the pests relocate in hopes of a more pleasant meal on another feeder root, the vine repairs the wound caused by feeding. This is crucial to the survival of the vine, since an open wound is also an open invitation to unwanted intruders. Infections caused by bacteria and fungi entering open wounds that can't heal themselves are the real cause of death for Vitis vinifera. Without mouth-clogging sap production like the resistant American vines, vinifera vines give Phylloxera no reason to leave the soil to munch on the leaves. This makes Phylloxera harder to detect in vinifera vineyards, since they rarely leave the soil and aren't forming a visible gall on leaves. As with the leaf cycle generations, entire generations of Phylloxera live and die on the roots of a vine without the need to move to different cycles. When conditions are correct, whether in much warmer climates or during a period of unusual stress, a winged form emerges. While the thought of flying Phylloxera seems to have terrifying implications, these wings allow for passable gliding at best. This form creates both male and females without digestive tracts that have but one purpose: to mate. After which the male will die, but the female will lay a single egg in the trunk of the vine that will stay there through winter and hatch in the spring, and most commonly start the leaf part of the cycle again. Understanding how Phylloxera and American vines co-evolve together makes it clear how these vines make perfect rootstocks. Since this has been realized, there has been a great deal of work that has gone into cultivating these rootstocks, including creating new clones and hybrids, each with their own attributes that can allow a grower the ability to choose the perfect rootstock to pair with their soil. Many even consider the choice of rootstock as important as the choice of variety and clone to plant in a vineyard. This pairing even allows a variety to be planted in places where it wouldn't normally be optimal. For example, overly fertile soils can be planted with rootstock that reduces vigor. Unfortunately, not every hybrid rootstock has perfect tolerance to Phylloxera, and this brings us back to America, with many factors converging to make the perfect storm. There's a bit of groundwork to lay here to understand how something so terrible could happen. First, Phylloxera and the American grapevines were most commonly found in the south and east of the United States, not California. Also, it took some time for the fine wine production to take off in the country. Earthquakes, wars, economic downturn between wars, and prohibition meant that creating fine wines didn't start to take off until the 1950s. And by the time most vineyards were being planted in Napa and Sonoma, scientists out of UC Davis were recommending one rootstock for irrigating vines: AXR1. European scientists cautioned that this hybrid vine did not have sufficient tolerance to Phylloxera, but American scientists stood by their results, and nearly 2/3 of the vineyards in Napa and Sonoma were planted with it. In 1983, a new type of Phylloxera, biotype B, swept through and decimated these vineyards. Nothing could be done except uprooting the vineyards, vine by vine, and replacing them with new vines with different rootstocks at an estimated cost of $10,000 an acre. New vines take 3 years to mature to the point where wine can be made, meaning that no revenue could be made in that time. The landscape of wine today has been forever changed. Phylloxera has reached most regions in the world except Chile, parts of Argentina, and South Australia due to strict quarantine and protective geological features. This means that the vast majority of vines are planted on resistant rootstock. In Europe, the mass replanting of vines led most to use the opportunity to make intentional choices about what and how to plant, leading to an overall increase in the quality of wine. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon so you don't miss a single video. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.